Very quickly, here is the plan. We are going to answer questions about stuff, specifically Camunda stuff, also potentially Roman stuff. It depends on your mood. We have, of course, two certified experts on today, which is myself, Niall. I'm a developer advocate with Camunda, and of course, Nele, who is a consultant with Camunda. Say hello. Oh, you got to unmute yourself first. There we go.
Hello. Cool that you're all here. I'm looking forward to the next 45 minutes.
Exactly. So you lovely people some of you have created some questions already. Those can be done by following this link that I imagine Luca might put into the chat. Is that a thing that might happen? Yep. And or you can scan it with your phone, and this will have this is the place where you can add questions and upvote questions for us. It's a link that's been open for a little while already, so we already have a bunch of questions. But if any more come to your head or some follow-up questions come along, that's perfectly fine. If you want to just generally chat to us and for instance compliment my shirt, I'm fine with that. You can use the Zoom chat for that as well. Okay, so now how do you ask questions? If you follow this lovely link or scan this thing here, you will come across this sort of page here in which you will see the questions that can be answered. Yes, thank you very much, Luca, for adding that. How to answer a question, but also if there's a question there that you think is relevant, you can upvote it, and then we'll subsequently be able to talk about it a little bit. And we'll see how many questions we can get through in the next 45 minutes or so. It's not too crowded, so that means that if you do have follow-up questions, you can probably feel free to turn on your camera on your mic and then maybe chat a bit as well. It won't be so bad. Okay, so let's just make sure that there's nobody waiting. Nope, looking good. Great. So I shall continue. First of all, if you follow that link, you will come across a poll. So we also have polls here. 3 of you have already voted, and this is just to help us get to know the kinds of experience you might have already with Camunda to help us answer the questions correctly. So, okay, that's great. I can see it bouncing around a bit. So played around a bit in the middle of Camunda project. So looks like people are just at the beginning of the journey a bit. And so we will talk accordingly, I guess. Okay, starting with now, let's drop down a bit. Great, 80%, fantastic. Okay, cool. So let's click on some questions, which is right here. So you can see here that the top questions voted are these ones here, and we also have the new ones. That's an interesting question. Maybe Luca can look into that. Luca, any ideas why this person isn't getting a link? I'm sure you can find some reason why that's happening. Okay, so let's kick things off with this question voted 3 times. What is the best way to access the data in Camunda? Nele, do you want to take that one or shall I? It's up to you.
Take it.
Cool, my question, great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the historical data in Camunda for a brief moment and explain what gets stored. So as your process is executed and moves from one step to another, obviously the route that's been taken is maintained in the database. But also, depending on your settings, you also have all of the users who have done tasks, which users claimed them, at what time. You have a whole audit trail around user tasks. You also have all the data that's been produced, when it was produced, how it was changed throughout the process. So you have a huge amount of data in the Camunda database. Now, in Camunda, we actually separate the database between runtime data, which is just a set of tables for currently running instances, and historic data, which is data that has been of processes that are all the data that's happened in the past, we would say, including running data. So how best to access it? Well, it depends what you want to do with it. So the very first thing that you need to consider is, why are you accessing it? Are you just interested in what happened? In which case you can use the REST API to just straight away query. We've a very broad REST API that you can just query to ask what happened. If you're interested in, for instance, I don't know, visualizing the data in some way, you basically have two options. You can either use Elasticsearch, sort of get the data out, either using Elasticsearch's own stuff, or you can export it using the Java API. Or, of course, if you want, you can use Optimize, which is the tool that Camunda produces in order to visualize that data. You, of course, also have the final thing, which is accessing it via the database directly. Go to town, if the database is yours, so you can query it. I would just tend to stay away from that because the queries that you write may be outdated with new versions of the engine if they change the database. So it's way better to actually use the REST API. So I will mark that as a tick. Great stuff. Okay. Yeah, since we're already in the data topic, Nele, do you want to take this one? What data should be stored in the Camunda database?
Yeah, I think that's a really good one and a common one that people are asking, what data should be stored in the Camunda database. And in general, I think as a rule of thumb, we would say store less data if possible. So just the data that you need to root your process. That means if you have, for example, an XOR gateway and you have a decision point and you want to root your process, that is something, or that's a variable you would store definitely in the Camunda database. Most of the time, if you start developing with Camunda, you already have another system with another database that is leading for taking care about maybe your customer data. And in that case, we would recommend that you just do a reference to that data and do not store it in the Camunda database. But of course, you could also store more than just process variables in the Camunda database. But I think from the things that I see so far, try to store as less as possible in the Camunda database. Actually, we do have a best practice around this one, like how to handling process data. And if you want to have a more deeper look into that and understand a little bit more, I will post it in the chat. And yeah, you can feel free afterwards to have a look there and see more things there.
Thanks, Anya. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of data around, there's a whole bunch of information around what to store and how to store. Hey, Leo, how's it going? Welcome along. We also have Torben Heinz, which is good because he dropped a whole bunch of questions, which we'll talk about shortly. Thanks for that. That's I will mark that as a tick. Fantastic. I really want to take this one here, which is about the difference between Camunda Spring Boot project and Camunda Run distro. So that's actually quite a complicated question because it actually brings up a few little sub-questions. The first is, what is Camunda Run and why would they be compared? So a quick explanation before I answer this question. Camunda has a bunch of different distributions to use if you want to get started with it. If you go to the download page right now and click the little download button, we have made it very easy. You will get the Tomcat distro, which is a Tomcat with Camunda embedded inside it and the REST API and web apps and stuff like that. If you want to configure Camunda, you would then need to configure your Tomcat stuff. Everything is sort of wrapped up in Tomcat's own configuration. An alternative is that you could create a Spring Boot project. So using the Spring Boot starter, if you were into Java, you could actually then embed the engine, use Spring Boot starter, and then basically create a Spring Boot project that has the engine already inside it. Then it's much easier to configure. You still have to configure it within a Java IDE, but you don't need to mess around too much with settings. But you do need to know Java in that case to be able to build the project. Now, Camunda Run is a new distribution that we actually launched quite recently. We've been talking about it the last little while. Most recent release of Camunda, which only happened maybe a few days ago, maybe 18 days ago, comes with this Camunda Run. The idea between here is that it's basically a complete Camunda distro. It doesn't. You can download it and configure it and run it without even needing to know about where it's run and how it's run. By which I mean that it's basically Camunda itself wraps around the Spring Boot application, so you don't need to touch it. You just need to download it and run it. It's really good if you want to configure the engine very easily without using Java, because it's all in a little very easy to understand JSON file, and also it's it's also really good if you're interested in just communicate with the engine via the REST API and using other languages. I have a tutorial for this coming up. I'll be releasing pretty soon, tutorial video, if you're interested. So check that out. So let's drop this one as a yes. Now, so Torben Hines, you might notice if you looked at the questions, dropped a whole bunch of questions about the same kind of topic, and that inspired us slightly. Nele, do you want to explain why Torben might be both disappointed and quite happy with this particular episode of Question Corner?
Yeah, so when we saw all the ZB questions, I got a little bit nervous and said, Niall, there are a lot of ZB cloud questions. Can you answer them? And I was like, not so sure. So we would both consider us not as cloud experts, but luckily we have cloud experts in the company. So we made Tim joining the next question corner. He is our tech lead for the cloud team. And I think he is more, he is the person who can answer all the questions. And then you know that you get a good answer out of it and not an answer that Niall and I just created. So I hope you'll be excited for the next question corner, because we will have a cloud special. We will take the questions we have here from Torben to the next version, and we will all give it to Tim. So yeah, that's
right. When it's gonna be?
It's the 9th of July.
All right. I have a presentation coming up that I wanted to integrate the answers to, but I'll keep in touch. Never mind. I'll stay here anyways.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
We'll see which ones we can answer, and then give you basic ones. But then maybe because we can probably roll. We can see what we can do. We know some stuff, but we'll be able to give you detailed ones. We will have detailed answers to these later on, though. So let's. I'll skip this for now, and I'll try and come to it near the end when I have some more. Historical events is. Yeah, I mean, it's already extracted to Elasticsearch. So yeah, anything that happens in ZB Cloud is available, not within the ZB cluster, but abstracted into external data source. So that's available if you want it. And you can start that up. That's quite straightforward. Then communicating to that is up to you how you decide to deal with those historical events. But they wouldn't be stored within the ZB cluster itself, because it doesn't really store any data within itself. It just basically exports all the events that have happened to somewhere more permanent. Okay, let's talk about this one here. Got voted a few times. So how well does Camunda work with WSO2? Can one use it to integrate? So WSO2 is an open source integration platform. It's got API gateways and stuff like that, and security and admin and all sorts of basic stuff. It's pretty cool. I've used it once before in a project with Camunda, so it's actually pretty easy to integrate. It's not that complicated. The main complication is, I think in the project I did do was actually just configuration within WSO2 itself. But I think we didn't really have too much requirement because both are quite open to integration as by design. So generally speaking, you can combine them both fairly easy. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's one little caveat there, which I think WSO2 has an internal process engine itself that I think you would just replace Camunda with instead. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay. Now let's see, where will we go for next? I will deal with these a little later. Nele, do you want to take this one here? The models vendor one?
Yeah, sure. So is it compatible with models from other vendors? And yes, it is. So normally the rule is Camunda has not our own language or an own notation. So we use the open standard BPMN 2.0, and we try to be accordingly to that. So if the other vendor also follows the rule of the open standard, there's no problem of taking the Camunda model from the Camunda modeler to any other tool from any other vendor, or the other way around also works. So if there is another vendor where you maybe model with, you can take the models from that vendor and put it into Camunda. Niall, I think you also have something to mention there, right?
I do, something that's kind of important, which is that the BPMN standard itself tends to the group that decides, the OMG, the Object Management Group, who created BPMN, they have a working group called the MyWig Diagram Interchange Group, which Camunda is a member, and they do every year they do an interchange with all the vendors. Now, if you are actually, I have a link for this ready because I saw this question. Okay, can everyone see this? Can you see that? Okay, Nele? Yep, great. So this is an event that's happening next Monday in which all of these vendors, all of them use BPMN either for modeling or for execution or both. And there's a really cool event where we're all going to get together and we're all going to take the same model and run it through all the systems to prove the interchange works. So that's going to happen on Monday. You can register for it if you like. Camunda isn't running this event. This is run by the Object Management Group. So it's more of a generic sort of event, but it's really, really good. One thing I found, because we've been doing a few practice runs of this, and one thing I found is that it's really interesting to see all the different tools. It's actually pretty cool. I'm really quite enjoying to see all the different modeling tools and how they work and how the different UXs kind of all in order to build the same standard. It's actually a fun thing. It's kind of worth seeing if you want an overview of the BPMN stuff and also the different ways in which vendors have done execution. So yeah, you see, it's a live demo basically of all the different vendors. Every vendor gets, I think, about 2 minutes. So it's a very quick modeling process, but worth it if you're interested. I will drop this link in the chat for those who are interested in seeing that. There we go. Okay, super. Okay, so that's the vendors one taken care of. I want to go back up because these questions are quite good from Patrick Colbert. I think I saw you in the meeting somewhere. I'm fairly sure. Yes, all right. But both very interesting because they're mildly advanced. I will take this one here, which is, can I prevent long-running processes in the job executor from being released when it's still running in the... So here's how this works. The engine itself will take a thread and it'll do a bunch of work with that thread, which is great, which is what you want. But of course, threads have timeouts. And also, once the engine takes that thread, it'll basically lock that work until it's done. So the question is, if it's long running, how can I extend it? So unfortunately, the answer is kind of a weird one. The answer is don't use the job executor. So for long running processes, we specifically designed the external task pattern in which you, instead of having the service tasks implement a Java class or something, you would actually have an external task that basically locks the job itself, does the work, but can also send back sort of lock. It can extend the lock when it gets sent back and can complete it, can do all sorts of really cool stuff that's actually designed for long-running processes and long-running jobs. So the answer to this one is basically, if you have a long-running process, the job executor will in the end not be a good fit because it'll end up having all sorts of problems, because as well as worrying about the lock time, you have to worry about the thread length of the container you're running in. Will the container kill the thread itself? Will Camunda do it? There's a lot of complications around there. So it's better to look at the external task pattern and implement that with external tasks. So I hope that sort of roundabout answer helps. So I will tick that there. Nele, I will give you this one because I know how you like talking about BPMN symbols. So this person finds one useless. Do you want to explain why it is or not?
Yeah, let me, I take your screen away for that. I think maybe sometimes it's easier to show the symbol and the modeler so everybody has an understanding what that person meant. He said there is this one symbol, and this is this guy here. This is called non-intermediate event. And the question is, why do I have it? Because if I would start an instance here, I create a token and the token will just go through it and go to the next element that might be a task. Okay, maybe in the beginning we would not add it here, but those things can become very handy. If you think of, yeah, you want to use key indicators for your process to measure. You can make them visible with those intermediate events. You can understand them as milestones. For example, if we have something here like we want to maybe sign a contract, and that's actually, or the customer signs a contract, that's some scenario where I often see those intermediate events, and then you really want to make that point explicitly in the model to say, okay, the customer signed the contract. So you have this milestone more explicitly in the model than just a basic task. That's where I would use those intermediate or non-intermediate events. And of course, if you have any other indicators like measurements, you also can use them. And if you then talk about analyzing your models, of course, you can see at what or how many instances has reached this, this non-intermediate event, for example. That's a point where I would use them to kind of give your process a little bit more structure and milestones. Niall, is there something you like to add for intermediate events, or do you also consider them as useless?
I mean, I do consider them mildly useless, but I see your point. Yeah, they're useful for kind of better readability, kind of reporting, but I tend to leave them out because I think they can sometimes potentially add some confusion if people don't know what they are.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of flavor. You don't have to include them, so you can consider them as useless as Niall is doing that, but there are also some use cases where you might want to use them.
Yeah.
Okay. Niall, I think I give you back the screen.
Dankeschön. Let's see, let's go back to the question corner. Great stuff. Okay, so let's spin up a little bit. This was, yeah, okay, this was a fun one. This is fun because I don't have to answer this question because we already have best practices on this, but they're quite well hidden. So this was, now first of all, it's a super common question. Because Camunda, when you first download it and start using it, all the securities are turned off. Now, is this because we trust our users to properly understand how security works and implement it themselves? Yes, but also partly because we don't really have time to configure security around an open distro that we want people to get started with quickly. So Ian, if you're interested, I will give you this lovely page here, Securing Camunda. So we have a best practices documentation here in Camunda. It's different to the docs page. So the docs.camunda.org, it's here. And this is like the docs that are maintained by the engine. And these are very I would consider these like an operating manual. The best practices documentation is more nuance. It's more detailing real life use cases. So you can see here that we discuss understanding user management. We have a whole bunch of stuff about securing authentication, and we have a bunch of stuff about securing the REST API, which is important as well. So and the web apps. And so while I do love answering questions myself, and I'm fantastic at talking forever, sometimes it's better to just give you a link to some nice documentation. So that's what I'll do now. So there's the documentation for the best practices of security is just dropped into the chat now, so you can check that out. Okay, so hopefully that answers the question for Ian. Great stuff. Let's say, is there anyone I was before? Let's see if I can answer any of these Camunda Cloud. I would say the answer to this is yes, eventually. Not sure what the timing is. We would need to know. So this is about Cavimo. Cavimo is our web modeler. Right now you can build models, BPMN models at cavimo.com. It'll be tightly integrated with ZB in the future. How far away that is, I'm not really sure. But it'll be there. It'll be definitely there as part of the cloud offering anyway. Is there a timeline when user tests be sorted? Soon, I think.
I also think so.
I think that might have already been done. Now that I think that might be done very recently, or it's already finished. But that's quite close. Not sure about the encryption. Signavio, yeah, that's no problem. ZB also uses uses BPMN 2.0, which is actually Signavio are also part of that. The MyWig thing I was talking about earlier. So they are the models you make in any tool that specifically says it imports or exports BPMN 2.0 will be valid. Yeah. The difference would be that there's some symbols that Signavio will be able to build that ZB can't run yet. I have no idea what it costs. I can't help you. Okta, yes, I think it will. I have no idea about the clustering mechanism. So yeah, some of these will have to wait till next time, I think. So hopefully that very cursory answer is useful. If I spoke too quickly, have no fear. This is recorded, so this will go up online soon enough. So let's see what we got here. This question I read, I think, about 3 times, and I'm still not entirely sure what it means. Nele, any ideas?
Yeah, I also struggled with this one. I tried to read and understand it, and they have so many words in it. So I think we have a pizza shop, and we want to start a process there by sending a message. And then the person is asking about the mechanisms that we have, and we have actually assignee, correlation, and multi-tendency. And this is kind of fun, or I would say, yeah, if you have a start event that is a message, you need to make sure you have a correlation. That means it should just hit one process instance. An assignee, I'm just imagining, and maybe I'm sharing my screen again to make that more visual, also in a BPMN model, why not? So if we have our nice pizza shop here, and I know, like, if that person is in the call, please let me know if this is the answer you were hoping for. So we have our pizza shop, and here we send the message start event. And we make that, of course, a message. And then one thing is, okay, we need a message correlation here. That means if we would configure that, we will give that message a name, and we also can give some correlation variables in that message. The next thing the person asked was assignee, and that kind of, for me, sounds like, okay, once we have an order here, order received, we might have a human task here, and maybe we want to do the assignment dynamically. So we don't want to have something hard-coded here in our property panel. We don't want to write a candidate group. Maybe we want to do that very dynamically. What we could do here to have the assignee set dynamically is we can use listeners. So in that case, I would say we create a task listener, and as soon as this task is created, the task can be assigned dynamically in that workflow. The next thing that I saw there was, I think, multi-tendency, and that is something that is nothing here on the model or on that on the level of the model. The multi-tendency actually is in the engine. So if you want to give different workspaces to different users, and that would be a case if we would imagine we have multiple pizza shops because we are a franchised organization, then each pizza shop would get a tenant in the Camunda engine. So just they see their own operating area, so to say. But it's nothing that I would have here in the model. So that was a little bit confusing with the tendency. Niall, did I miss something from the words? Or...
I mean, I think you understood it better than I did, honestly. So that sounds like a very good explanation to me. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's really the answer, but the person was hoping for. So please just let us know if there is a follow-up question.
Cool. Okay, I will steal back the screen. I hope you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can maybe answer, let's just take that one. We can maybe answer 1 or 2 more questions before we say goodbye. Let's see what we got left. I quite like this question as well. I know I've already answered a Patrick question, but sure, why not? It's a really fun one. So let me quickly talk about why this is an interesting question. And also, if you were, for those of you who answered the initial poll about being new to Camunda, you will find this thing show up occasionally. This is an optimistic locking exception. So let me explain what this question is trying to actually get at. When using lots of threads on the same instance at the same time, we don't want to have any inconsistency of state. So Camunda is designed so that for every single instance, only one thread is allowed manipulate the state at a time. And that's usually absolutely fine, because what we can do is we can usually maintain that consistency, because in most cases the state is not changing more than once in any given millisecond or milliseconds. But this is not true of parallel multi-instance, which is what Patrick's drawing at here, which is a scenario in which you have a multi-instance task. Like, let's say you want to do something n number of times for a collection. So you give it a list of objects. For each object you want to run that number in parallel. Now that is a problem, because when it then comes back at the same time, these threads, they may end up trying to complete their task or implement the state at the same time, and that will mean only one will succeed and the other will fail because it's been refused, and that's when you get the optimistic locking exception. You will see these frequently depending on how you model your processes. The cool thing about them is they basically go away by themselves. So if you see them a lot, it means that you really need to change the model. But if you don't see them that frequently, it's actually okay, because they have an infinite retry mechanism. Because optimistic locking means that we try to do something, but right now we can't. It's the understanding that they will be able to do this, but a little later on. So the thread will either fail, or in most cases, what you should do is give the engine a retry mechanism. So it'll retry maybe 3 times over a certain amount of time. And that can actually solve that problem. There's a lot of mechanisms around solving it. There's actually, I'm pretty sure, an entire page in the best practices about dealing with multi-instance stuff like this. So it's very much worth taking a look at that. It does depend on your modeling. It also depends on how you how important true parallelism is. You could have them run sequentially, and maybe it doesn't matter that much. The speed is not that big a difference. So I would look into that. But generally speaking, you don't want to see them, but optimistic locking exceptions will happen occasionally, because sometimes these things bump into each other. And it's very much a safety mechanism to make sure that the engine doesn't create any inconsistent state. So it's a good question, but the answer, sadly, is really complicated. Without seeing the process and the model itself, it's hard to suggest changes. Okay, if you do, Patrick, maybe pop onto the forum, and we'll talk in more detail. We've come to near the we're coming up to the end now, I think. Let's see, is there any? Oh, we got rid of that question there. I think the cloud questions we'll do it later. I don't know enough about AngularJS to answer this question, just enough to say that you should be able to use AngularJS with a task list, considering task list is written in Angular. The one stipulation I should say is it's written in Angular 1, so I'm sorry about that. So if you have a more advanced Angular thing, then maybe you might have some problems with it. Okay, so let's continue the fun. I'm going to throw it to, there we go. Let's see. Ooh, yeah. Oh, look, 5 people have answered. That's nice. Yeah, it's. I think I actually might even have another poll somewhere. Possibly. Ah, yes. So there's 2 things I want to talk about for both of them, the events coming up and the new newsletter that's available. Luca, are you still around somewhere to talk about that, or shall I? I will. Oh, Luca's come out of her silence. Ah, she's alive.
I can talk about it, of course. So we will have we are working on a newsletter at the moment for our developer community. So I will send a link into this chat right after this. And at the bottom of the page, you can sign up if you want to. So this will include first-hand information about product updates, community contributions, content highlights. So if you're interested, just sign up for it. And yeah, then we will send out the very first newsletter soon.
Luca, are there any events coming up that we should know about? Meetups, code studios, anything that might pop into your head?
You should know now, right? We have, of course, we always have meetups coming up. I will send the Camunda meetup page in the chat here. And of course, our next question corner will take place on July 9th. So as you all know, we will have a very special guest there, Tim from the Camunda Cloud team. So he can really answer probably all the questions around Camunda Cloud. And yeah, otherwise you can always check the events page on our website for more events.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Luca. So I think that brings us to the end. Oh, look, that's right, because once everyone sees a thank you slide, that means that the thing is over. So I would first like to say thank you very much for everyone for popping along. I'm sure I'll see you next time at the Question Corner, where we'll have a Camunda Cloud special. And thanks for all the questions. It was really fun answering them. And I hope it was a useful experience for you as well. So yeah, see you next time. And thank you, of course, for Nele for hosting with me, for Luca for helping set this up. And I'm sure it'll go just as smoothly next time. So cheerio.